talking with Sean about first-time home buyers, why would they want to jump in the market with so much uncertainty? So I foresee this causing things to stall dramatically.
You're listening to the Ottawa Real Estate Podcast, your go-to source for all things Canadian real estate. And now, here are your hosts, Paul Stevenson and David Warren.
Hello and welcome back to the Ottawa Real Estate Podcast, your go-to source for all things Canadian real estate. My name is Paul Stevenson, joined by David Warren. We are both level 2 mortgage agents. Dave is also the owner at Referral Mortgages, and we want to say thank you to all of you for listening. Thank you to our amazing sponsors, and we're back. It's a long weekend has passed. Easter has come and gone, and we're back. Long weekend's over. This is typically when the spring market really kicks off, Dave, but it's snowing today. So here we are. It's been one of those years so far. It's been one of those years.
I don't think it's picking up in action today, that's for sure, in Ottawa with the cold weather we're seeing. But then we'll be back this weekend to 10 and 13 degrees and sunny. So who knows? Who knows if this weekend open houses are buzzing or not? We'll find out next week from our realtor partners what they see this weekend, whether anything picks up. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Sean touched on that. Sean touched on that when he was on Sean Cathcart from Korea. He's their senior economist. For anyone who didn't watch that episode, you can go back and listen. That was a couple of weeks ago. But he was saying that the weather has like a direct impact on buyer mentality and just like people taking action in the market, listing their homes, et cetera. So this snowfall, April, which is crazy, is going to kind of push everything. We're going to have May showers now bringing June flowers. Dave, last week we touched on the HST, the new HST rules, which definitely got some feedback. We got a lot of responses, a lot of people's opinions. We kind of alluded to the fact that this was something new. It had only come out the week before, so we were learning it as we went and so on. There was a couple comments on the YouTube channel. I just wanted to touch on those. And then I know we saw since the last episode, some kind of real world experiences where these things were implemented and implemented differently than we might have thought. So I'll just touch on the comment and then we can kind of get into that. So Stacey Moffat said, educate yourself. The 8% has not passed legislation and could take up to 6 months. The purchaser shall assign to the vendor all of the purchaser's rights, title, and interest in the rebates and shall execute all documents reasonably required by the vendor and or Canada Revenue Agency or the Government of Ontario to facilitate the claim and assignment of such rebates. I think Stacey actually wrote, because she wrote underneath, everybody should include this clause on their purchase agreements. I think she actually copy and pasted a clause that she suggests people put into their offers. So I won't go through the whole clause, but basically she's suggesting that what we stated was incorrect. And I just wanted to kind of clarify because there was a lot of confusion, Dave, when this first came out. And I know now we have actually seen purchase agreements from builders with this implemented. So maybe I know you saw a few recently. So do you want to maybe just touch on what you're actually seeing kind of live out in the wild versus what, all the headlines and everything are suggesting?
Yeah, I mean, to Stacey's point, and we commented last week on this, is that the provincial portion, it was announced for April 1st on March 25th. So basically a 6-day notice to lawyers, to builders, to everyone, and to banks as well. So a lot of people had no idea how to treat this. And then it has not passed to Queen's Park. It has not been ratified. The federal portion has been enacted, that 5% in all provinces. But the PST portion has not been ratified. Even this morning, I was trying to find an update as to a timeline of when it might be passing Queen's Park, and I couldn't seem to find one. So I don't know when it's on the docket to pass. Everything is as of April 1st for, whenever it passes, and I'm sure it will because, this is a joint provincial federal initiative. So I don't foresee it not passing through. However, it's going to be retroactive in some cases. What I've seen this past week has been 3 live examples. And then also while speaking with one of the top 4 major banks, what they're doing about it. So first and foremost, one of the banks has no idea. They have not had a chance to even update their policy for their underwriters. They don't know how they're treating it. They're basically looking for a statement of accounts closer to closing to be able to then adjust that purchase price or take into account. So the commitments they're pumping out are keeping that HST in. And because they need to go by whatever's on that purchase agreement if there's anything to the contrary. Now for builders, I've seen one in which the builder stated that the purchase price is accounting for the HST rebate. the full HST rebate. They've already accounted for it in that purchase price. And that's a property from a builder that was listed on the market publicly on MLS and was signed. That purchase agreement was signed April 1st. So right on the line, and is from a larger builder and not like a small guy. So that was an interesting one because I don't know how much of that, came into account, but it also then stipulates in it that closer to closing, it is on the lawyers to verify that they do qualify for that full rebate. Another where a new build actually closed last week. So this was one of my agents. It closed after April 1st. The funds, it had already been committed. It had already been signed off on by the bank. Funds were already in transit. A statement of accounts or statement of adjustments came from the builder. So on closing, you have a statement of adjustments that comes from a builder that indicates what the purchase price is, what rebates there are, because keep in mind, there's always been, a $24,000 rebate or a maximum of $24,000 on new construction. And then, net price, any sort of upgrades, any deposits held in trust, et cetera, et cetera. And then, how much is owed to the builder. It's closer to closing. The builder's lawyer will provide that statement of adjustments. In this case, it was provided. Funds were already in transit from lender to lawyer. Lawyer received that the builder was accounting for the rebate, that they were going to apply for it. So in that case, the client owed less money to the builder on closing. Funds were received by lawyer going by funds received by bank. What builder requires, paid builder. That client or that borrower ended up with a substantial amount in their bank account on closing because that full rebate was accounted for. So two very different scenarios.
And that agreement was
prior.
That was agreed upon before this even came into effect, right?
Correct. So the closing was after April 1st. And they even stipulate in the, in all of the announcement was you can retroactively apply as well. So in effect, even if a purchase agreement was signed last year, that so long as closing after April 1st, the argument is there that to be able to apply. And that's, an application to CRA. Again, another large builder. So perhaps they know on the back end what they're getting, or it's still they want to, not have a delay in closing, whatever it may be. So again, completely different scenario. And then another where they have it fully in there as far as HST, like gross price, less HST, and that net price for that full HST rebate, and it's, whereas that first one that I saw on the first did not have like, this is the gross price less 13%. It just said that this purchase price is inclusive of that rebate. Whereas the other one was gross purchase price, less rebate, net price. But that, again, it is still on the lawyers, but three different scenarios of new construction closings or new construction purchase agreements that were treated differently from the builders. So it's, I think the interesting part of it is future closings where they figure that things will get sorted out. But I think it's pretty interesting that the builders are, even last week's case, like providing that rebate back on that closing where, it hasn't been, fully ratified, if you will. But
yeah, and that's kind of, I think the key takeaway here, and this is what we were saying last week, is that we don't exactly know how this is going to be applied by the builder, by the lawyers, and even how clients are going to receive that. Like your clients definitely were likely not expecting that rebate, right? And then surprise, they get this big refund at closing from a house they agreed to a year ago, whenever it was, So, so I think we'll continue to see this kind of, I don't want to say confusion, but this, unknown, I guess, right? Is this like uncertainty of exactly how this is going to be implemented. And most importantly, if you're a buyer and you're out talking to builders, like make sure you have crystal clear understanding of exactly how it's going to be applied, where it's going to be applied, and how that's going to impact you kind of throughout that process, because it does make a huge difference. And there is that deadline as well, right? So make sure that if you're buying a new build that closes, December of 2027, that since it's outside of that kind of 1 year, that it is going to still apply, which it will, but just, ask all these questions, right? Like make sure you're doing your due diligence as far as exactly what that builder, how they're going to do it.
There's also a fourth scenario in there I haven't come across yet, but I've heard of, is where the builder is putting the onus on the buyer to apply for that HST rebate. So they're signing the agreement inclusive of HST, and it's on them to apply for it. Now, a scenario like that, to give an example to listeners, could be if you're a buyer, this could be advantageous for you in the sense that, let's use an example, you buy $1 million property, that full HST rebate, once fully ratified, is $130,000, 13% of that million. Now, the minimum down payment on a $1 million property as an owner-occupied property insured is $75,000. So 5% for the first 500,000, so 25. 10% for the remaining 500,000 is 50,000 for a total down payment of 75,000. In a scenario like that, where you're getting a mortgage based on that contract with the HST on it or included, you're getting that mortgage at that. You're putting down 75,000, applying at a later date for a rebate, getting 130,000 back.
We call that the double down payment rebate.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious, like, again, they haven't fully specified that that's not possible, but you could come out with zero down and actually an extra 55 grand in your pocket, which is an interesting loophole if that's the case, right? Again, I don't think builders or the public, like, kind of typical of government, in a lot of cases, things come out in a budget or announced and it's like they want that headline of it enacting right away, but there's not enough like clear guidelines as far as how that's going to proceed. So some of those purchase agreements where they have the HST included, it closes after the first, clients apply back to CRA because that is in that announcement that they can apply to CRA for that rebate. So if they've closed after April 1st, borrower applies, like they could be profiting on that property, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, and the value could have gone up even since they purchased it. So like they're doubling that equity build, which is nice. So I think that's a good summary, kind of follow up from last week, Dave. The next thing I wanted to ask you about, because we were talking about this before we came on air, was this kind of like, there's a lot of inflation warnings right now that are kind of stacking up. And it seems like with the conflict happening overseas, like Wall Street and the overall market seems to be kind of shrugging it off. There's some wild ebbs and flows right now as far as, and we've seen it like, in the market itself, not the real estate market, but the actual investing market, that, there's one announcement, everything goes one way, another announcement, everything goes the other way. Like there's so much in flux, there's so much uncertainty that there's a big disconnect right now between like what's actually happening and what is being kind of relayed on to everyone's. I know you had some really good takeaways from that, and I'm wondering if you want to just kind of take the floor and just explain like what this great disconnect is right now.
Yeah, so a couple things in that is looking back to 2008 was the last time that oil prices were touching $140 a barrel. Through 2028, before the housing crisis, that increase in oil, when it hit that $140 a barrel and oil prices at the pumps were surging, like you look at the metrics of all the other areas within the economy for food supply and everything like that, they started drastically increasing along with it. And we're following that same hockey stick curve because go figure, who would have thought that increased oil prices affect, food,
Everything.
and, transportation. It's crazy. But you saw that, and that led to inflation going up and was kind of that start of the stock market kind of tanking, and that was kind of the precipice of the market collapse. I'm not saying there's been a lot of checks and balances put in place in both Canada and the US since then. I'm not saying that that's going to happen, but it's a very interesting time, especially when there's like an 8 p.m. today on April 7th deadline from Trump to Iran of whether to basically whether to commit crimes against humanity, if you will, war crimes. So, really that can go two ways. His bluff is called and he doesn't do anything. How does the market react to that? He goes forward with something extreme. How does the market react to that? Or that some sort of peace deal is announced, and how does the market react to that? But today's a very tumultuous day in what's going to be in the market. And I think that's really leading to the market as a whole kind of, so to speak, shrugging things off. But we're seeing like screaming warning signs, like energy prices, like I said, skyrocketing. We're at, I think, $120 a barrel right now. Sticky core inflation. So headline numbers are okay, when you look at it, but the underlying numbers have been extremely sticky and remaining like stubbornly high. Labor markets data has come in stronger than expected. Normally that's good in a for the jobs market, but the Bank of Canada and the Feds means the economy is still too hot as well. So makes it hard to justify cutting rates. And really in that from an odds perspective for cutting rates, the probabilities for the Bank of Canada April 29th is at a 97% chance of no change, and the Federal Reserve on the same date is at a 99% chance of a no change. So obviously with that data, they're not expecting, any changes there, but again, things could really change pretty quickly and go the other way if this kind of continues on, and really kind of from everything I've been reading from economists is in that 60 and 90-day point of oil being jacked up to where it is when it starts to really start rippling through the economy. And yesterday in Canada we saw all of the airlines say that they're adding a new charge to ticket prices. I think Air Canada is like $50 a ticket surcharge because of oil prices right now, and they for tickets that are already sold. WestJet and Porter and things like that kind of following the same, and a lot of the airline and travel industry saying that this is likely not to be the first surcharge in that regard because of how much it's escalated. So with that, again, that plays into long-standing inflationary numbers going forward, but investors there's kind of a disconnect because investors are essentially betting that these inflation spikes are temporary or noise, and that they're pricing in a rate cut even then in the future as if inflation's already like a solved problem, which it clearly isn't. So I think that's kind of that'll be interesting to really see how today goes, how the markets react tomorrow. I think you're going to have a huge spike or a huge sell-off in the market. So tomorrow can be a very disastrous or a very profitable day for those investment accounts.
Even the best photographer can't hide drywall dust and paint splatter. And every day you delay listing could mean missing peak spring pricing in Ottawa. A to Z Cleaning Expert gets your property truly photo ready. Don't risk going to market half ready. Mention TOREP at atozcleaningexpert.com to receive priority scheduling for your next listing. Are you thinking of buying or selling a residential property? Relationships are at the heart of every real estate transaction at Gertin-Poirier Avocat Lawyers. We love to bring residential buyers, sellers, agents, lenders, mortgage brokers, and the law together to close the deal for you for an effortless client experience that opens doors. Call us at 613-744-4488 or visit our website at gertinpoirierlaw.ca. Let's get to the heart of your deal. Your home is one of your biggest investments, and the team at Big Westboro can help you protect it. Our expert brokers will find the perfect coverage to keep your home and belongings safe. Call 613-239-5792 or visit thebig.ca/Westboro for a free quote. Think big, protect what matters most. Are you trying to grow your mortgage business? Centum has the tools and support to help you take your business to the next level. Get access to everything from free unlimited custom marketing to daily direct pay. Find out what your business can do with Centum. Learn more at joincentum.ca.
And then the Strait of Hormuz, really, if it's being held hostage right now. So how does that affect things, with that continuous spike? We haven't really seen that. So what does it mean for borrowers, like fixed versus variable? Markets are underestimating inflation risk. So there's a danger that bond yields could suddenly spike up even further once kind of the reality sets in of what's going on. So, we've talked about it before. We've seen a huge spike. A lot of the insured rates are in that 4.39 5-year fixed range for insured rates. Some of the big banks are high fours already on the 5-year fixed rate. So, could we see it spike up even further with those yields kind of continuing if as the market digests what's going on further, or the inflation numbers digest, and lenders are tacking on a risk premium to bond yields as well. So it means even if the Bank of Canada wants to be dovish, your mortgage rates may still stay high because the market is nervous. I've seen from the major banks, which usually have in their treasury department, you can go back and ask for discretion on a rate, for example. So they have their rates on their rate sheet or whatever it may be, but depending on the closing date of that mortgage, the size of it, the strength of borrower, et cetera. You can ask for some pricing discretion. All of that has been off the table for basically a couple weeks now because of how in flux the market has been, and they don't want to take on that additional risk as the bank. So I think right now the market's wearing rose-colored glasses and betting on a soft landing with maybe some rate cuts in the future, but the data, like especially oil and labor, is really painting like an inflationary picture. Which if that happens again, we might see rates back into the fives on the fixed side. I'm not no again like basically don't kind of at the end of the day basically don't count your rate cuts before they're hatched, if you will.
Yeah.
So again, like I think tomorrow when this comes out, a lot will have happened tonight, and the market is going to react, I think, violently one way or the other tomorrow.
Yeah, a lot to digest there. I think to your point, like anytime we see crude oil spike up, it's going to impact the bonds, can impact the rates. And that seems to be where things are trending right now. With regards to like everything that's happening overseas, to your point, the US, Canada, like North America and essentially Russia don't technically, from my understanding, and I'm not a geopolitical expert, so please don't blow me up in the comments. But from what I've read and what I understand, like North America and Russia don't necessarily need the strait for oil, like as far as oil, like we have, like, I mean, North America especially, and not that we're utilizing it, but we have access to a lot of oil, as does Russia. So by this strait remaining closed, I think it's 20% in that range that the world's access of oil that goes through the strait. So by that being closed, even if North America's fine, even if Russia is fine, that is going to impact globally the cost of goods, the cost of everything, right? So it's going to be inflationary no matter what, regardless of whether we're okay, economically. Like internationally, it's going to spike prices across the board because, whether we're okay or not, things still need to move in and out from country to country, and that's going to cost money. Now, Europe and Australia are probably going to be hit the most because they are the most reliant on this. They don't have their own oil sources. But I think if that strait remains closed, that also gives the opportunity for China to increase their, naval presence and kind of potentially take that over, which then strengthens their, their global political stance as well. So there's a lot of like things that could happen here. There's a lot of things that couldn't happen. And that's why all of these things are very, like, as you said, like it's unknown. And tonight is kind of the third deadline. I think they extended it twice. So this is kind of the third deadline that Trump has provided them. And he's basically saying, yeah, he's going to, take out all the bridges, all the infrastructure. I think he said 20 years right now would take them to rebuild. He's saying it's going to be 100. I mean, there's all these like, headline grabbing comments, which is just how it is. It's kind of this constant threat of what might happen, what might not happen. We saw last week just at the potential that there might be a ceasefire or an agreement, the markets rallied, 2% on the S&P in a day, which is, I think last time it happened was like that, last year, April 9th, which again kind of brings me to my next point is that, from what I've seen in following the markets for some years is that there is a lot of this like symbolism around certain dates. April 9th last year was the date that the tariffs were lifted and the market completely rallied. When this comes out, it's April 8th, which is the day before that rally last year. So I don't know. It all just seems like too convenient timing wise to keep my tinfoil hat off for this conversation. But it seems like there's just a lot of things that are like on the precipice of happening that will dramatically impact the global economy. They already have, but I mean, like more so, as you said. So what'll happen tonight, in my opinion, I think, and we'll know when this comes out. So I'm really putting my foot in my mouth if I'm wrong. But I think what we'll see happen is like a further expansion of, another 10-day, grace period or ceasefire, whatever. It's going to be a further expansion for further discussions. I think we'll probably see that for a little while. And then, hopefully there is a solution found. But from a rate standpoint, like this is why it's so uncertain right now. And to your point, like there's no guarantees that rates are coming down. There's also no guarantees that rates are going up. So it's like, we don't know. Mm-hmm. Nobody knows. Like it's when we have these conversations, we have to take it with that approach of like, this is what is anticipated, but we don't know, and typically it's not that way when things are kind of calm per se, internationally or globally, with these sorts of geopolitical and inflationary events. Like it's a little more consistent. We can say, okay, it seems like for the next year we'll have X, Y, Z. We don't have that for the next week. We don't have any clarity, any certainty one way or the other in the short term. So it really is like a wild card right now, and we won't know until these events either happen or don't happen, So it's a very confusing time to be a buyer or seller or anyone kind of entering and like dipping your toe in this market without any understanding maybe of the global tensions or what's happening. Maybe there's a conflict overseas, but not understanding how how all that impacts, the economy and the inflationary and the bonds and the everything else on our side, which then impacts their rates. It's kind of just like, well, Bank of Canada announced they're holding rates, so rates should stay the same. It doesn't work that way, right? And it's understandable why someone wouldn't understand it, because it is complex. There's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of like small things that impact everything globally. So it's very hard, Dave. It's hard to navigate this market right now. All that to say.
I think because of that, I mean, last year, to your point, April 9th, 2025 was Liberation Day, and tariffs placed on, which put the market in pause from a buyer perspective. I think this is going to cause the same sort of thing in the real estate market. Buyers being uncertain when you're looking at the pumps and you're basically tipping or close to $2 a liter. I think in number of places in Quebec, it's $2 a liter. In Ottawa here, we're at $1.85 or so. Out west, it's worse. So, that's what people, to your point, like they might not understand the rates environment, but when their cost of gasoline for their car has gone up so dramatically, and now if this continues, it's going to ripple through the rest of the environment. Again, it puts that without stability, people feel uneasy, and rightfully so. So why are they going to want to make that largest purchase of their life, especially when we talk, when we're talking with Sean about first time home buyers, why would they want to jump in the market with so much uncertainty? So I foresee this causing things to stall dramatically. But on my other concern with all of this going on overseas is really kind of domestically with CUSMA. Like we have the Canadian, US, Mexico free trade agreement coming up in July 2026. It's expiring in July. So because of this war overseas, and that's putting inflationary pressures dramatically on domestically, which we haven't addressed yet. In Europe, they've cut gasoline taxes by, a quarter cent, like by 25 cents a liter and things like that. We have not done any of that here to remove anything from that side to help address inflationary issues. But further that, like if CUSMA in 5 months, there's no renegotiation of it, which right now we still have elevated tariffs on things that do not fall under CUSMA, and CUSMA fails because the US is distracted with this war in Iran, and so is the rest. Domestically, it's not on the top of their list. Like the costs of goods and trade is going to immediately jack up. That free trade on most, I think the numbers like in the 80 percentile of like what we trade with the US and Mexico it falls under CUSMA anyways. And it's not much at fault like that these tariffs are really affecting. But if everything is now being affected, being taxed, having those additional tariffs on it, if those are still not gone as well, like and there's still elevated oil prices, like really it's not going to be a pleasant market, and a pleasant rate environment in any capacity. And at the grocery store or at the gas pumps, like it's going to be even worse. And so that's my fear domestically on that as well.
There is, I believe in Europe right now, they've actually, because of the cost of oil, they actually have a stay-at-home order for workers. Like they have to work from home versus drive into the office, which I think is quite ironic given that in Canada, we're having return to work orders where they have to go into the office versus stay home, like complete polar opposites of that equation. I also think like with the CUSMA coming up, like I think there is also this, especially in Canada, this kind of like, anyone but Trump mentality or, screw the USA right now and so on. But realistically, like we are reliant on the USA for a multitude of things. And I think we have to put the politics aside when it comes to this agreement, because as Canadians, like we need more affordability. We need things at a lower cost. And by having an agreement with the US, we get all of those things at a lower cost. So aside from like, yes, everyone hates Trump. Everyone in Canada is like very against his policies and the way he approached things. I get it. But he's only going to be there for another 2 years, right? Like after that, we're still going to be bordering the US. We're still going to be like brothers of the US for the next couple hundred years, like for as long as we're here, like we're going to have to work with them in some way. So like we have to put that opinion aside of their leadership currently and think long-term for Canada, like what makes the most sense for us as citizens to make our lives more affordable and allow us to have like good domestic export and also affordable imports from the US, you know?
Yeah, I mean, and the same being for the US, like they do need Kuzma as well,
Yeah.
to open up free trade, just like Mexico, because they're like, we are their largest trading partner. And so the cost of goods, and, you talk about oil and things like that, like, how much extra revenue we're generating for them by selling them oil on the cheap, for example, or any of the other products that like their base needs that as well in order for inflation not to go. And we're so tied, like we keep talking about in the market, to the US and what happens with the US, with what happens with the T-bills, like affect, our government bonds, like follow that same yield curve, things like that. So and our inflation numbers are, we're so, like when inflation here is up, it's typically up there and vice versa. And we're dragged both together, whether we like it or whether people like it or not. We're kind of just saying like F them because Trump is in power right now. Well, you know what? Midterm elections are coming up. They're probably going to lose the House, especially with this going on and people being pissed off in the US. So it's not going to be Congress and the House. And so it's going to be a little more one-sided because I think in history, there's only been 2 times that they've actually been able to continue maintaining the House through midterms. So that's going to help kind of straighten things out, or Trump not have within a very short period of time, just kind of carte blanche, if you will. So really, to your point, like people just saying like F Trump, like, well, he legally can't be elected again. So you're not like think in the future. Look at Kuzma right now. Look at what's going on right now. We need to, and I know this is like becoming more of a political episode, but we really need to figure this out and figure it out quick. And even if that's short-term relief for the population, so we don't get into that massive inflationary situation.
I think that's heavy enough for today, Dave. What do you think? Did we lighten the mood a bit? I know we had a few more things to touch on, but we're getting up there. Let's get into the boosts.
Yes, let's do it. Boost me.
I'm gonna give you 4 today because I think they all hit. They all slap. So here we go. Number 1, quick shout out as well. Thanks to our sponsors. Thanks for our listeners. Thank you for being here. Here's the mood boost. Number 1, did you hear about the famous pickle? He's a really big deal. Number 2, I went on Amazon to buy a lighter, but all they had were 3,472 matches. Number 3, what do you need to make a highway in an art studio? A mile marker. And last but not least, topical for the podcast, number 4, how much does a chimney cost? Nothing. It's on the house.
Okay, not bad.
3 for 4? 3 for 4? Thank you, everyone. April 8th. Crazy we're April. First quarter done, 2026. Insane. Thank you for listening. Probably not still here, but if you are, thank you. We'll be back next week, 10 a.m. Every week, 10 a.m. Check out our socials. Dave and I's information is in the comments. Reach out anytime you want. We're always here to chat. Have an awesome week. We'll see you soon.
Deuces.